It's actually a secular nation.
Hello, and welcome to the Secular Nation Podcast, brought to you by the Atheist Alliance of America. I am your host, Tim Brand. With me, my best friend in the whole wide world, Michael X.
Oh, you're the best, Tim.
So this will actually be a first, we'll have an interview that's without me. As an interview,
An interview in the can.
Yeah.
No, not in the can, not that can.
That must have been a tough one on you, Mike.
That's right. It was a big strain.
Anyway, but with Horace Gilgamesh, the author of the Awkward Moments Children's Bible. Again, I wasn't sure how that was written out, or like how that was supposed to read, because it's the Awkward Moments Not Found in Your Average Children's Bible.
Volume 1.
Sort of the idea is, it's kind of in there hiding.
Yeah, it's almost like one of those medical disclaimers that's in the fine print.
Yeah. They sent this to me. I read it in a single sitting. It was delightful, to say the least. It's basically kind of a parody of a children's book, or like a children's...
Yeah, it even has the same typeface as the highlights for children on the cover.
And the first page are sort of like the thing to write your name in or whatever, and there's...
Yeah, this book belongs to Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. And there's an activities section in the back with a Mad Libs and a crossword puzzle. We actually tried to complete the Mad Libs, but we had lackluster results.
Yeah, I wasn't very good at coming up with verbs.
There were a lot of them. But this is one of those things, it's kind of almost become a genre of itself, as you sort of parodizing the biblical media aimed at children and accentuating the rather violent and unfortunate parts of Scripture.
As opposed to parodizing itself, I suppose.
Basically what the Brick Testament is, which I love.
The Brick Testament is great. You can actually use it with kids. This book I would not use with kids.
Yeah, then there's also the Thinking Atheist on his YouTube podcast, or his YouTube page. I think he has sort of a series of, like, Our Bloodthirsty Bible or something, which has similar things.
It's a storied tradition.
Although there's some times where it can't actually compete with some of the actual unironic biblical media I've seen sometimes. Like, I did on my YouTube wanderings, I found a children's animated version of the story of Samson.
Oh, I think I've heard about that.
Yeah. Which, I mean, for those who aren't, like, well-versed in, like, biblical stories, like, probably a lot of people know of Samson, like, you know, because he's sort of almost like, he's the Bible's equivalent of Hercules, kind of, only, you know, instead of fighting monsters and whatnot, he's basically just murdering people.
Yeah, or the Old Testament idea of what a monster is, which is anybody who's not from Israel.
Yeah, well, it's throughout the story, like, the Philistines aren't actually the bad guys. Like, he's marrying a Philistine girl, which apparently, you know, Philistines have no problem with, intermarriage, and they give him 10 bridegrooms. He challenges them to tell a riddle. Well, it's actually just a really stupid riddle. And this one is basically referring to that one time where he tore a lion in half and then found honey inside it for some reason.
Oh, man. Well, they don't teach that in science class either.
Yeah. But they guess the riddle only by cheating, which pisses them off because, well, you only knew it because you cheated, and the riddle was a scam to begin with.
Right.
The wager was for, like, each of them would give him a set of clothes, or else he would give each of them a set of clothes. So he just ran out and he just murders 10 Philistines and steals their clothes.
Poor Philistines.
But there was this children's animated version of the story. Like, it did, like, all the points there, just without any kind of commentary on it. It's like, yep, Samson went and killed 10 Philistines, and then he tied torches to the tails of foxes and burnt down their village. But anyway, back on the subject of the book. Yes. It does, it tackles a lot of these sort of weird, unfortunate, or just kind of just bizarre stories, and it has really great illustrations in it, I think.
It's funny because we discussed in our interview about the cover, And, the possibility that people would be confused that it was actually a children's book, but there's a bunch of animals and people drowning on the front cover. Yeah. So you wouldn't think that would be a danger, but people can overlook things.
One other thing that kind of I both laughed and just like, oh god, that is so wrong, was they're doing the story of Lot, where Lot is offering his virgin daughters to the crowd of sodomites. In the illustration, they have his two daughters, and they're dancing next to a pinball machine.
Right, which is a reference to
The Accused.
The Accused.
Sometimes I gotta kind of hand it to him, alright, that he
Sly.
actually went there,
Yeah, but yeah, there are lots of little subtleties in there that are cute. Definitely one of those things you can read it in one sitting, and there's more.
Probably nice, something just like to have just lying around for company or whatever.
So one thing that we should say, with the Atheist Alliance of America conference coming up in Seattle, what are the dates on that? That's August 7th
through the 10th. I hope so, because those are the days I asked off.
That's right. August 7th through 10th, and Horus Gilgamesh will be there, and as an exclusive, I should put in some kind of ta-da sound there, that they will have the next edition of the book ready before release, so you can be among the first to have the Awkward Moments Children's Bible Volume 2.
Nice.
So what else is going on at the con? I know there's a couple of yahoos going there.
Yours truly, and
me truly.
Ours truly.
Yeah. Last year, we were at last year's conference, and I was a sound man, and Tim was working the table.
Yeah, and I was R and Ra's personal chauffeur.
And personal chauffeur, yes. So this time they've foolishly allowed us on stage.
Mm-hmm.
So come there to see us either do really great or,
I might sing.
You might sing.
That's just a warning. I was doing that all weekend last year.
So we'll see. But come for fun and potential singing and some great speakers. Obviously, Rebecca Goldstein, Steven Pinker, Richard Carrier, Richard Haynes, August Brunsman, Amanda Metzges, Minga Fertrell, Horus Gilgamesh, our friend, Rebecca Vitzman, Diana Castillo, Ben Blanchard, Bob Seidensticker, Sam Malfi, Travis Simmons, Ian Harris, Steve Hill, Marsha Botzer, all kinds of folks. So, a cast of thousands.
If anyone has a car, I would love someone to take me into the city so we could do karaoke at Monkey Bar.
So that'll be the Secular Nation podcast evening activity.
And I think, I think they're planning a day trip to Mount Rainier.
Yeah, and I have to say, if there was anything after I became an atheist that resembles a religious moment for me, it was when I got to Mount Rainier. It is an amazing, gorgeous place.
I've been there myself. It's wonderful. Like, you see there's glaciers. At least while they were there, those last. They might not be there anymore.
Global warming. There no polar bears there either. So.
Uh-huh.
But, and so there is going to be a tour there. So come for the fun. Another piece of information we should give is that July 16th, if you sign up before then, you will get a free second night at the hotel there. And what is that, the Doubletree?
Yeah, it's the airport hotel.
Airport, yeah. Also, it's good for kids. Camp Quest West will be there. So, and my daughter was at Camp Quest West for the American Humanist Conference and had a blast. So, bring your kids. The Camp Quest West people are amazing. All right, Tim. Well, now you can hear my interview with Horus Gilgamesh, the first time I've done an interview solo. So, hold your criticisms, everyone.
I'm very proud.
So it was a great time, and we look forward to seeing him and everyone here at the Seattle Convention. Hello, we're here with Horus Gilgamesh, author of the Awkward Moments Children's Bible, Volume 1, illustrated by Agnes Tickheathen. I guess that's a Dickensian name if I ever heard one. Horus will be at the AAA conference in Seattle coming up August 7th through 10th, so please sign up and come see Horus. So welcome to the podcast, Horus.
Hey, I appreciate you having me, Michael.
So, first question, is this a children's Bible for children?
Absolutely not. I was actually You're reading the title there. It's kind of funny, and that creates a fair bit of confusion. The full title is actually Awkward Moments Not Found in Your Children's Bible. That's kind of grayed out on the cover as a joke. So no, it's really meant for adults. It's really meant to help drive biblical literacy in sort of a satirical or parody sense. But we use more of like kind of the go the F to sleep format where it looks and feels like an actual children's book. They're full-page children's book-looking illustrations done by a fantastic illustrator where we actually take actual literal Bible verses, from various translations that are available out there, and we bring them to light in these illustrations so that from a reader's perspective, they may be immediately recognizing the story of Noah's Ark because they see a colorful illustration with a boat with a bunch of animals on it. And it takes them a moment to realize that their body's in the water. And then it takes them to realize that they read a different verse than they've probably ever read since they'd thought about Noah's Ark really since they were probably 6 or 7 back in Sunday school 30 or 40 years earlier. So that's really kind of what it's about is driving a bit more biblical literacy, driving a bit more critical thought about the Bible stories we thought we knew, as well as frankly uncovering and bringing to light Bible stories that people haven't never heard in church before, or bringing to light biblical history of changes to the Bible throughout history as well. So yeah, it's all good fun and games, but at the same time, it's a very serious book for as silly as it is and as colorful as it is. The point is really to get people to think critically.
I certainly appreciate like the, for example, bringing up the carnage in the Noah's Ark story. It seems to be such a beloved story, yet nobody ever seems to think beyond the very surface level. So you have these cute little baby toys celebrating a Holocaust.
Exactly. It's funny. And again, when it comes down to it, it's the fact that folks haven't thought about Noah's Ark differently since when they learned that the first time they were in Sunday school when they're children. I was actually down in Oregon visiting family here this week, and I brought a copy of the book to a great aunt who I trust to not throw me out of the house for my faith in the last few years. And she was kind of interested, and she's not an overtly religious person. I don't think she's been in the church in 30 years, but she has an identity of a kind of a spiritual Christian in different ways. And so we're talking about Noah's Ark. When I read, and if I don't mind, I'll just kind of read that verse that we used for the Noah's Ark story. And I read it to her, and she's 75. So I read, "The Lord regretted ever making human beings, and he was sad. So the Lord said, I will wipe all the human race off the face of the earth. While I'm at it, I'll kill all the livestock and the crawling things too. I'll even kill all the birds in the sky. I wish I had never created any of them in the first place." Someone and they're looking at this full-page illustration with floating bodies and mommies and puppies and dinosaurs. It took this aunt again a few moments of kind of looking at me, and she just said, "Oh well, hell. It's no surprise that people make up a god in their own image in order to, cover up for the sadistic God of the Bible, is it?" I thought, well, that's kind of the conversation we're trying to have, is to think critically about if a God is so loving and benevolent and kind and caring and forgiving, what kind of God would do that? And that's just the cover image alone on the book. So it's been a great conversation started on both sides of the aisle. Realistically, originally just started off as a kind of pet project between a group of friends of mine, interfaith friends from all walks of life, PhDs in seminary to, raging atheists who'd never been in the church before, sitting around having a few beers a couple of years ago, just talking about this study that had come out that Pew, Religion Forum had done, showing that 56% of Christians, self-professing Christians, can't even name the 4 Gospels or the first 4 books of the very foundation of Christianity. So we got to talking about that and just kind of how funny that was and the reality of biblical literacy and, my time, in many years of full-time ministry as a devout Christian, and how that was really one of my goals even in ministry, obviously, was biblical literacy. And then the conversation kind of kept taking turns throughout the evening, and somehow there was a conversation about the fact that people around the table, again, PhDs around the table, even today in 2014, were confused as to whether or not men and women had the same number of ribs. Not because of any gap in the scientific knowledge or training or teaching throughout their careers in college and all that, but purely out of the cultural misunderstandings and the kind of the norms we take because of the story of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, and Adam loses a rib. And so that's actually where the original illustration came from was this kind of joke or parody on the idea of, combining the story of Adam's rib with the urban myth of people stealing organs in hospital or in hotel bathrooms. And then before we knew it, we threw that online just kind of as a joke, and before we knew it, we had 4,000 or 5,000 fans that were kind of looking for more and more illustrations. So we added a few more as we went, and before we knew it, we had a number of fans, looking for a book project. So this first book we released last October, and it's kind of funny. It's taken off. I think as of this morning, we're getting pretty close to the 100,000 fan mark in less than a year. So there's definitely kind of a hunger for this kind of conversation starters, again, from both sides of the aisle. We're actually coming up on just getting ready to release the second book here in September. We'll be taking, it's been kind of fun. We'll be taking a few copies, or just preview copies to the conference when we're there in August. So if folks get a copy of Volume 2 before anybody else does, about a month before they do, we'll have those available. But we actually had a prominent Christian write the foreword for that book. We have a number of Christians pastors who actually use this book and use the illustrations in their church on a weekly basis because they see the value of getting people to actually not just take blind faith. Blind faith doesn't really help anyone. And so we have Christians using it, but at the same time, what we weren't really expecting out of the gate and wasn't our goal, obviously, was the atheist and free thinking and the agnostic community is really where our main fan base is now. And again, that wasn't really ever our goal. We had no we had no design on preaching to the choir. Even when I started this book, I wouldn't have considered myself a professing atheist. I wouldn't have labeled myself in that way, maybe an agnostic. But so in the last year, it's been a great journey for our fans. It's been a great journey for myself and Agnes, the illustrator, to really think critically about where our own faith stands. And it's been a lot of fun.
Wow, I mean, that's incredible, because I was going to say that, back when I was a Christian, I probably would have loved this book as well. Then again, I wasn't a fundamentalist. I was more of a mainline Protestant. And so that was one of the questions I was going to ask is, have you been selling this in Christian bookstores, and what has been the response?
Yeah, I mean, Christian bookstores, no.
Nah.
Well, actually, I mean, bookstores in general, not really. It's been a self-published project from the beginning. Early on, we had a number of publishers who were interested in taking the project on, but there was such a concern over how we wanted to do the artwork, and the kind of the double and triple meanings in the art itself, let alone some of the commentaries we wanted to make in terms of cultural impact of the Bible today, that a lot of publishers really wanted to soften it up because, frankly, they have Christian interests just like anybody else. So we kind of took for lack of a better term, a leap of faith and went the self-publishing route. And so, most of that is going to be through Amazon or direct. But yeah, I mean, we have a fair number of Christians that are absolute rabid fans. And if you look, especially like on our Facebook page, we even spend a fair bit of time and money and effort, I guess, for lack of a better term, evangelizing the Christians. So when we come out with a new illustration that we think is something that will be a catalyst for conversation, we don't spend money, through Facebook promotions to advertise, to preach to the choir, to other agnostics or free thinkers, people who've left the faith. We spend money to go after the folks who are spending their time on Jesus daily on a daily basis. Very different kind of audience, and as a result, you have the clash of the titans. If you bring up, even yesterday, I'm trying to think of, we had some posts dealing with, anything from like yesterday. You might be covering the story or hearing about the story about the Mormon woman who's been kind of pushing a new women's movement inside the Mormon Church in order.
She was excommunicated,
and she was charged with apostasy. And so we used one of our illustrations coming from Timothy and Paul's teaching about women are not supposed to speak in church, and if they have any questions, they can go home. And our commentary on all that was in the first book. That illustration from 1 Corinthians was in the first book. And we illustrate that by showing a normal church scene that looks like a church scene, out somewhere in the South, just a cute white church with a preacher on the steps with men walking up. But then you realize that they're dragging their women behind who are pregnant and barefoot wearing bondage masks on leash. Because, frankly, when you look at that and you take this in the context of this woman who just got excommunicated from the Mormon Church, it matters, is what it comes down to. The reason we use that illustration in the first book is as a result of a blog article that came from James Scott, who's one of the leaders in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church of America, where he says flat out, well, no, of course women shouldn't be allowed to speak in church. And just because some churches allow women to speak in church and, raise their hands in church doesn't mean it's right. It just means we're getting too far away from God and away from what is true. And so, yes, of course, the OPC doesn't allow it. And this is 2014, and this is 2014 in America. And then you start looking at the reality that, for the first 140 years of this republic or this democracy, half the population wasn't allowed to vote. Women weren't allowed to vote. We're coming up on the 100-year anniversary of the vote here, 5 or 6 years. And just the idea of thinking about the cultural context of a 2,000-year-old book that continues to have an influence today. And I think that story about the woman being excommunicated from the Mormon Church is very relevant and very timely, and is still worth talking about. And that's one of the the comments or the questions we get all the time is, why do you even bother? Why do you even bother? If you don't believe in God, why do you even bother? And I guess this is the answer. Somebody has to care. Somebody has to be willing to speak about some of the real tenets and teachings of the Bible that don't get communicated in church every week, because frankly, most Christians don't open their Bibles every week, let alone every year.
And I thought I considered myself well versed in some of these stories, but what was the one? There was the Exodus one. Pardon me while I flip to it here. Oh, the Saved by the Blood, Exodus 4:24 to 26.
There's a fair bit of foreskin in the Bible. I mean, you have to admit, the Bible is hungry for foreskin. I think in the first book we have a couple of illustrations dealing with foreskins, and soon to be King David with Saul, was asked to get 200 or 100 foreskins, and he comes back for 200 foreskins in order to be betrothed with the hand of his daughter. And yeah, so the story of Moses, where God gets angry at Moses. We're never really told why, but God gets angry and he decides to kill Moses. So Moses' wife takes out a sharpened stone and cuts off the son's foreskin and rubs the bloody ring of this foreskin all over Moses' feet, saying, "You're now my bridegroom." So this made the Lord leave Moses alone. And what does that have to do? First of all, can we stop with the foreskin already? Whose idea was that? Without the Bible, without these just crazy rituals from 2,000 years ago, where somebody probably got found out by molesting a kid in a tent and says, "God told me to do it. This is how we show how that we are the chosen people." I mean, it's kind of madness. And some of these are just funny, obviously. Saved by the Blood. We show that some translations of the Bible actually refer to unicorns. There's a lot of kind of funny, silly stuff in the first book.
Well, it's funny with all the foreskins. I mean, it's a good thing for the New Testament. People wear crosses now, but would there have been golden foreskins on chains? I'm sorry, bad joke there. But Moses being, of course, one of the key figures, but even he wasn't immune from the wrath of God, and who could be fooled by such a crazy stunt.
But he was fooled, and he left Moses alone. And you have to wonder. And so we do try to have a mix of silly stuff like that, or God sneaking around in front of Moses and only showing him his backside purely for the fun of it. Or we take a different look on Elijah and the two bears who come out of the woods to kill all the boys.
My personal favorite.
And we take a little different modern take on that.
Heavy emphasis on bear and its current context. So, well, let me ask you another question, because you mentioned the different translations, and yours seems to be a new one, the YAMV. You want to tell me what the YAMV is?
That's funny. I hadn't thought about that in a year. So, what it came down to is, what it comes down to is the Bible in every translation is copywritten and protected by the Bible publishers and the Bible translators. Folks like Zondervan Publishers. Thomas Nelson, all these guys. So we originally started by trying to choose one translation, either the ESV or the CEV or the NIV. And what it came down to was we just couldn't get rights in order to use certain. And so we ended up, and at the same time, we don't agree with the translations that some of these translators use. I mean, a few of the illustrations in the first book and now in the second book are dealing specifically with the translations that have been chosen and kind of altered throughout history to completely change the meaning of a verse. So we kind of make a tongue-in-cheek joke that we use the YAMV translation, which is yet another man's version translation, which is basically our translation as a joke. It's basically meaning we're just going to go ahead and paraphrase the general consensus between the top 4 or 5 major translations out there, and let the reader then go online to sites like Bible Gateway or Bible Hub and actually look and see that no, we're not making this stuff up. When the story of Jesus and the leper, for a perfect example, Jesus comes across this leper, and the leper says, "Please, Lord, if you're willing, you can heal me." In the original, the most authentic versions of the Bible, the most authentic, oldest original texts we have, the manuscripts we have available, the word used is Jesus was angry. Or Jesus. He was angry with the leper, and went on to heal him and told him, never, go away and never tell anybody about this. But of course, throughout the years, that's been translated and changed and shifted to now all the Bible said Jesus showing pity and compassion for the leper. Of course, he healed him, and then he told him to go and sin no more. So the idea being, one of the questions we have is, why is the most original, most authentic translation that all biblical scholars, these aren't atheist scholars, these are PhDs, coming from Princeton, are the most authentic and true stories, or translations rather, being hidden in the footnotes of Bibles? And generations and generations of Christians go on continuing to, I guess, relay information that scholars know isn't true, and these stories, and these stories are like in the next book, for instance, we use the story of Jesus and the woman taken into adultery. That again, it's a complete fabrication. It's been added to the Bible, and people know that. I mean, there are people who would say, well, it may have been written in the side notes in a couple of translations, that were found. But the reality is the general consensus of true biblical scholars say, well, yeah, it was an addition. But this is the whole story of he who shall cast the first stone. He who was out without sin, rather, can cast the first stone. So in the next book, instead of even illustrating Jesus or the woman in adultery, we illustrate essentially a pitch session, a Mad Men pitch session, where there's an advertiser sitting around going, putting together a movie and saying, hey, what we really need? We really need some kind of rebel moment. We really need some kind of hero character. We need a damsel in distress. We need the bullies who are after Jesus. And they come up with the idea of, well, let's take this woman into adultery, and Jesus can come and kind of be the James Dean character that comes and saves the day. And that's what we need. And we're going to make millions now. So,
we have the badass Jesus now.
Yeah, exactly. And the story is added to the Bible and forevermore, and is quoted all the time. So those are kind of fun. And
so it's funny because I'm certainly down with the YAMV concept. In a way, I guess it was a happy accident. I never had thought of the copyright on God's word. I guess you could still lay claim to it, but so now you're able to kind of take advantage of that and actually provide a more realistic translation.
Well, I wouldn't say realistic, but it certainly we do.
In concept, I guess.
One of the biggest complaints we will get from the Christian community is, that's not what my Bible says, or that's not in the Bible at all. And we'll just kind of flat out say that story doesn't exist in the Bible. Like, for instance, Jesus talking to the crowd in Luke 14, where he tells everyone in order to be his disciple of his, they have to hate everyone, hate their mother, hate their father, hate their wife, hate their children, hate their brothers or sisters, and yes, even their own life. They have to hate themselves in order to follow Jesus. And we got so much hate mail out of that one illustration, saying, and people just say flat out, that doesn't exist in my Bible. It says, Jesus says you should love me more than your mother, love me more than your father. Well, it's a difference without a distinction. Right. Second of all, that's not actually what the original Greek has to say. The original Greek says mazeia, which is hate to the point of anger, or hatred. I mean, hate's to the point, essentially tantamount to murder when it's used other times throughout the New Testament. And so, yeah, I mean, we do try to, in the illustrations, we quote the verses, and of course, many people think, let's say, the King James Version is the only version of the Bible, or the NIV is the only version of the Bible. And so I'm very thankful for tools out there like Bible Hub or BibleGateway.com that can allow Christians, non-Christians alike, to go and understand that, no, there's a big difference from translation to translation, not just what's translated, but what it might be hidden in the footnotes. And so you can see a lot of that online. I think Bible Gateway is probably one of the best.
Yeah.
But I'll say, as a caveat, we brought up Zondervan a minute ago, as far as one of these publishers that owns copyrights to like the NIV and the TNIV. So one of the other complaints we get all the time is how dare you make money off the word of God? Have to laugh, because in my time, 10 years, I was a leader of a pretty good sized international Christian nonprofit, and one large part of our organization was on distribution here in the U.S. of Bibles, books, movies, and things, as well as big online organizations that made a fair bit of money for a lot of people. I mean, it's all about making money, and there's a business there. So I always joke saying, I'm not really a man of the cloth in the sense that I was never a minister preaching, but I was a man of the cloth, cotton. We made a lot of money off of work. And the same is true today. You know, they own Bible Gateway now, bought it from an organization out of Michigan, and it's just filled with advertising. You go to Bible Gateway and you can, you know, do everything from Christian Mingle to sign up for a new college, and all of the ads are directly on the Word of God.
Well, right. I mean, I love this idea that somehow you were the first person to with his book, not even in your previous life, but you're the first person to make money off of the Word of God ever.
It is a multi-billion-dollar industry every year in the United States and worldwide, for that matter. Sure, it's big money.
So I guess they might have a point here, unless it's one of the Apocrypha that I never heard of. This Horus 392-94, Jesus Cures Cancer. I don't recall that one.
No, that's funny. I actually forgot that was even in the book. That was a joke online where we put together. Actually, originally that illustration was put together. The visual illustration without the verse was put together as kind of a dig on Jesus Daily. If you've ever been to Facebook it has Jesus Daily. It's kind of I would say it's one of the most grotesque and disgusting and predatory websites online, where it's just all about tragedy porn. And, you know, they are kind of the originator of the 1 like equals 1 prayer, 1 share equals 10,000 prayers, you know, that kind of thing.
Yikes.
So they're all about just, I guess, preying and exploiting people's tragedies and I guess hang-ups. So we put that illustration together originally just to kind of show the absurdity of the idea that, you know, praying for somebody online is going to save them, and Jesus is going to come to earth and do anything you say because it feels good. But that illustration in the book, we added in as well to kind of start making the points of what stories do you know in the Bible that, you know, didn't actually exist in the Bible.
So, Horace, you were a professional Christian then before this. Were you raised in a fundamentally Christian, not fundamentalist, but a primarily Christian upbringing? Were you converted and then deconverted? How's your story go?
You know, it's kind of a work in progress, obviously. I love the idea or the word you use there, professional Christian, because that is very much how I ended up in a lot of ways. I mean, I certainly was devout, but yeah, going back, I mean, I was raised quasi-Catholic. I was kind of a CEO Catholic for the sake of my grandmother more than my real, you know, immediate family. But I went to Sunday school and I was confirmed and I was communion. And I did communion and baptism, and I was never an altar boy, but spent a fair time around the Catholic Church growing up. But it wasn't really until college, you know, I was born again. I'll just put it that way. And it was out of one of these, you know, kind of big tent revivals. I think it was called Hell's Bells and Heaven's Gates.
Wow.
It was one of these, you know, bring the college students in and scare the living hell out of them by showing skit after skit of these people who are making decisions that would either then lead them to heaven or hell. And you're standing there with a group of friends and the music's pumping and they understand the theatrics of how to get the emotions running, and they start doing altar calls, and my friends are going forward for the 5th time, of course. They're all devout Christians who have to, you know, week by week prove that they, you know, are acknowledging that they are sinners, they need saving every week. So yeah, I went forward. It was one of those, you know, emotional moments. You know, I could feel the heat, which of course is just a physiological response, that I was embarrassed and confused and I was emotional. And so yeah, I was in college, and then, you know, I would say I was nominal Christian for a number of years. You know, I was actually, you know, I was leading worship. I was a musician for years, so I was leading worship at my local church, and then I was in business originally, and I started doing some marketing for a couple Christian booksellers. And the next thing I knew, I was being offered a job to take over as kind of the director of marketing and director of communications for pretty good size international ministry. So I went ahead and took that and moved across the country, and yeah, became, like you said, a professional Christian. I hadn't heard it talked that way, but. I was definitely devout. I was extremely involved in evangelism. I was extremely involved in biblical literacy. I was extremely involved in, you know, critical needs issues overseas, everything from AIDS initiatives to solving world hunger and getting Bibles in the hands of, you know, every African and Romanian out there. But unfortunately, before we got there, you know, Billy Graham organizations had already saved, you know, the entire continent of Africa 10 times fundraising. So it was a little difficult from a donor perspective to continue, showing that kind of, revenue return on investment once, everybody else, Youth for Christ and Campus Crusade and those guys were all done missions organizations. But as far as, conversion out of it, that's kind of a long process. And I keep thinking through, like, what was really the catalyst of that? Part of that was everything from, being in Nigeria or Ghana when, you have starving, emaciated, malnourished, dying from essentially diarrhea, coming up and asking you for water. And, in Swahili. And all you know how to say is, I'm sorry, I have no water, but can I offer you a Bible? This is the living water. There's talk about cognitive dissonance, for the love of God. I mean, you're watching these people die.
Can I wring this out somehow?
I mean, it kind of started breaking my heart. And the more, of those overseas trips, especially I was doing, I started kind of feeling that pressure of, God, we're just in the wrong business here. And so I started that internally, like in our organization, really getting away from the evangelism side of things overseas. I was really pushing from a leadership role the idea of the critical needs issues. And so we really got, not just myself, we had a great staff of directors and that really pushed more towards the directions of critical needs. Empty stomachs have no ears. And so if we can't solve the most immediate problems of hunger and medicine and safety first, then there's no chance of evangelizing. And so that was a good thing for me. And out of that, I should say, I was involved with writing 150-page business plans on how to run a good size Christian ministry. And out of that came a lot of conversation of things like the Engel scale of evangelism, which it's like a diagnostic chart of showing on one side of the chart, you have somebody who has absolutely no knowledge of Christ. These are people, indigenous tribes living up in the Andes, have never heard anything about the gospel. And then right in the middle is the conversion moment in their life. And, there's a number of steps to get to that step. And then at the very, right side of the scale is the fully discipled follower of Christ that people might call, they're sold. There's no way they're ever going to go back on their faith. Nothing they could do would ever, change that. And they are all about, evangelizing others as well. And so in that, I will say that as I continued to put together business plans and marketing plans and putting together projects and media and new programs, new partnerships, the more I really started realizing, well, holy crap, I can see every step in my life when somebody essentially manipulated me from -5 to -3 to -2. And there aren't very many ministries out there, organizations out there that don't use the scale of evangelism. And it's, it is what it is, but it puts a name to the fact that, we are manipulating people, that, there are entire organizations, like Youth for Christ, that is, their whole goal is really about, -3 to -1, -3 to +1. And then there are organizations that are more about discipleship, and they're from, +3 to +5, and, that kind of stuff.
That's a new one on me because, I guess you got to see how the sausage was made. It wasn't, there are thousands of other ways I've seen people lose their faith, but not through kind of seeing the specific guiding process of converting people.
Exactly. Yeah. And so at the same time, I should say, as part of that reorganization of the ministry I was in, I was starting to get a little bit aware of, let's say folks like Richard Dawkins, for instance, or Sam Harris. I wasn't reading these books. I was buying these books to give to my staff, essentially to do research to figure out how to counteract this, this outside worldview thinking that was such, so harmful to Christianity. And so, long story short, the organization, we ended up kind of spinning it off into multiple organizations and selling parts off to profit groups and things. And so I took a real solid year and a half off. During that year, we went through some tragedies of our own. I lost a mother. My wife lost a baby, and I was really kind of going through this crisis of why is there suffering in the world? How could a God let this happen? And it wasn't from a woe is me perspective. It was very much from a theological, what is the understanding of all this, And so, I'll put it this way. Using the Engel scale, I can look back through my life and tell you step by step how I was manipulated as a small child through, my indoctrination in Catholic school, learning little stories about Jonah and the whale and Noah's Ark and God's love for everybody, on through in college at that Hell's Bells Heaven Gates, evangelism, big tent revival. I made the step to become a Christian, like a born again Christian. And then going on down the line, +2, I became a worship leader in church. +4, I started, leading Bible studies, and +5, I was a full-time, evangelist, if you will. And so all of that really seemed inorganic. And so when I started having these kind of doubts for myself or questions for myself, I made it an absolute point, to shut out anything from any other sources but the Bible and my own thoughts. So, like I said, I had Richard Dawkins' God Delusion, never opened it.
They call that the la 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 I'm not listening phase.
Well, exactly. Well, it was a great phase, because just now that I look back, I realize that Christianity and God and the whole idea there was never actually self-evident to me. If I had been born in a vacuum and people hadn't shoved, CCD, a Christian school down, Catholic school down my throat, and hadn't, pushed me into these evangelistic, supercharged emotional moments, and if I didn't feel like I was going to go to hell and burn away from my family for all eternity, I would have never come to these conclusions just by walking through the forest. And so when I started really, looking at this for myself, I wanted to come to these conclusions for my own. So I really started reading the Bible, and many atheists or agnostics would say the greatest tool out there to create atheists is the Bible, and for me that was true. So it
was a multitude of factors, including this kind of Wizard of Oz moment where you saw behind the curtain, as well as the problem of evil. And
it was, and what I was going to say there, end with, was my conversion to Christianity, I think, was 10 times more honest and truthful and organic than my conversion into Christianity. So, and that's kind of where I go. This first book had already been out for 3 months before I'd even heard of Christopher Hitchens, or read, even for that matter, Bart Ehrman's books from a scholarly perspective. Right. And so, in the first few months after the book came out, I felt, because I had so many atheist fans that were kind of self-identifying with the work we were doing, I was getting exposed to more and more of the reality that, no, there's something that is self-evident, and that is the fact that the Christianity is not. That, if you're born in a vacuum, you wouldn't really have a fear of this divine power that's lording over you, morning, noon, and night, and is watching your every move in the shower. Especially, that's kind of, we make a point in the second book that's coming up. The first illustration in this next book is dealing with the first question of God of the Bible: Adam, where art thou? I remember just kind of laughing, thinking, wait, what? The omnipotent, powerful, this guy I'm afraid to masturbate in the shower because of doesn't man on earth is? Are you kidding me? And of course people would say, well, no, he knew. Of course he knew where Adam was. He was giving him a chance, as any father would, to bring a child out. And then you read, the story of Jacob, in the woods, and God comes out and wrestles him and has to dislocate his hip in order to kind of win, and he still doesn't win. And so his next question is, what is your name? And again, I thought, wait, you just came down to earth and whatever. This is a silly story, but you wrestled this guy all night and you don't even know his name? And you're going to give him a new name, and you're going to make him the father of the tribes? Like, why am I so worried about this personal relationship with a God who has no idea who the only man on earth?
But let me get this straight, because this actually is, so this last push into a more atheistic worldview kind of came about from your own book.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, it absolutely did. Like I said, when this project started, I would have probably considered myself a hope-filled agnostic, or maybe even a deist from a perspective. But even as a Christian, I believed in evolution. Didn't believe in creationism. I was a Big Bang. I have a great deal of interest when it comes to things like particle physics and astronomy. And so I always came in from that perspective. But yeah, like I said at the beginning there, this all came out of a group of interfaith friends just talking about biblical literacy in general. And so the more I started kind of, again, I don't want to say poking fun, but the more I started bringing other stories to light in the Bible that actually have a real impact on current, Christianity and current politics and current, modern culture, the more I started realizing that, no, this is, A, it's not healthy, B, it's not really relevant, C, it's getting kind of creepier and creepier. And the more, in the middle of that, I should say as well, going through some other struggles with friends or family that knew of my kind of work on this project from behind closed doors that, I was excommunicated from family, not my own blood family, but my in-laws kind of threw me out of the house because the project, and they don't even know about the book itself. They just knew that I was studying the Bible and that I no longer believed, and I no longer, ascribed to the idea of drinking blood. I mean, the whole fight was about the idea of communion, symbolic or otherwise. It started to really ring true to me that, wait a second, say what you want about Islam, say what you want about Scientology, say what you want about Hinduism or Buddhism. There aren't many other religions out there that still require the sacrificial or the ritualistic consumption of deity's blood on a weekly.
Yeah, a central aspect of Christianity is pretty grim and rather psychotic.
It is. And you brought up the idea, luckily we're not wearing foreskins on chains around our neck, but the idea of the crucifix. I actually did a post just asking people, it's 2014, which of these concepts is more offensive? Because we always hear about people being offended by the Big Bang, the idea that, something from nothing and how you can't prove that, and that's just offensive, the idea that this stuff all happened magically. Well, magically. The same thing with, creationism versus evolution. So put together an image, a meme, if you will, of a picture of the Big Bang, or representation of the Big Bang, a picture of three skulls representing evolution. And then we had a picture of Cameron and Mitchell and Lily from the show Modern Family, a gay couple that had adopted a child. And at the bottom, we had a picture of the bloodied Jesus from Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. And just ask the question, it's 2014, which of these is really more offensive? The idea that, the earth is more than 4,000 years old, the idea that a loving, same-sex couple could actually adopt and care for a child that wasn't born by accident, or this idea that everywhere we go, we're expected to bow down and have reverence for, the idea of a bloodied savior, who came to earth to essentially kill himself for our sins, and the whole idea of vicarious redemption, and the idea that we're also supposed to drink that blood and eat that flesh in order to have eternal life. And that if you don't, more than half of Christians consider you as an atheist to have less character than that of a rapist, according to the study by University of Oregon and British Columbia a couple of years ago. So to me, I don't put myself in the position to be spoken to in that way. But people are really surprised because I spend a lot of time communicating and conversing very patiently and very positively with Christians from all walks of life who do come to our page to argue or to question, well, why are you doing this? Or why is, that's not in my Bible, and that's my Jesus you're talking about. And I say, okay, well, who is your Jesus? Is this the Jesus that tells you to abandon your family? Is this the Jesus? The difference, the whole idea of I am the vine, you are the branches. If you get far from me, I'm going to throw you on the fire. Which Jesus do you know and have been told about? Is it the same Jesus that gets chased out of town because he's convincing everybody, trying to scream at everybody else that they're demon possessed? And everybody says, well, no, you are, you freak. You're out here telling us, that you're the son of God and that we're demon possessed because we're not willing to drink your blood. Get the hell out of our town. So, a lot of the first book was kind of just more tongue in cheek and fun and footloose and fancy free. And the second book certainly has that. We deal with talking donkeys, and we deal with, the Valley of Dry Bones coming to life, the army coming to life. But we also deal a lot more with Jesus in the second book, philosophically, his own family thinking he was insane, coming to take him away to protect him because his own family, the people who know him better than anyone on earth, is saying he's gone insane. He's gone crazy. He is mad. We need to go and get him. And his answer is, well, who's my family? They aren't my family anymore. You're my family. You're my family, his disciples. You're all I need. And, these are the kinds of things that nowadays, luckily, we do have the capabilities to help people with these kinds of delusions so a lot of the second book really starts going into, if you take a step back and take a look at a lot of what Jesus was saying and doing and teaching, you come up with a very different perspective. And so especially when you put these two books together and start looking at some of the teaching, even when it comes to the ideas of martyrdom and, I think we have a martyr problem in America when it comes to Christianity nowadays. A lot of people it's not just Muslims that would love to have that ultimate sacrifice and be able to say that they died for their Lord. They don't put on suicide vests. But they certainly like to play martyr and play persecuted all the time, and are willing to.
Well, there is a war on Christmas. You got to admit.
There is a war on Christmas. There's a war on the Ten Commandments. There's a war on the Pledge of Allegiance. That's one of the things. We actually have an illustration in the coming book that we just released this last week online. It's kind of a preview that is, I don't know, I think we got 20,000 views in the first day. And it's just the illustration of a classroom, a multi-ethnic classroom, where they're all giving the Pledge of Allegiance. And so you see over the shoulder of a Christian school teacher that has a list of names, and they're very American names, John, Brittany, and Kelly, but they're also, Yakimo and, Arabic names and like a Gustav, from Eastern Europe. And so the illustration is giving the point about the Pledge of Allegiance under God, and we call it under Vishnu. And we use illustrations in the Bible about, and this is from the New Testament, where Paul says, make sure you keep track of people who have different worldviews and don't trust them, and make sure you shun them so they are ashamed. Keep track of them because they can't be trusted, these kinds of things. And so we use those illustrations, that verse to go with the illustration, but then make the commentary about the Pledge of Allegiance. And that came out, I was in DC in May when some of the conversations were going on with a lawsuit in New Jersey about the pledge. At the same time, it was when the Supreme Court was having the rulings over starting public meetings with prayer.
Yeah.
And so I was with Agnes going through DC at the time, and we took a tour of the Supreme Court building and got to see the two tablets on the back of the doors leading in the Supreme Court, the Ten Commandments represented. And it's kind of funny how quickly the docent or the guide on that tour said, "Oh no, those aren't the Ten Commandments. Those are the Bill of Rights. Those are the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights." Like, no, they aren't. Come on, they're tablets, I through X. Come on. Anyway, so this illustration during the Pledge of Allegiance, we have the conversation to say, listen, if you were in New Jersey, it's very different than being in this little white bread town in the middle of Oregon. If you're in New Jersey and you have a classroom filled with people who have come to this country leaving countries out of fear of persecution of state-established religions, state religions, and the first thing your child is told to do is that they must put their hand over their heart and say, I pledge allegiance under God.
Yeah, I've lived in that county, and it's a very, tech-heavy center, and so there's lots of diversity there, and it's appalling, and it's a great county to have that lawsuit for that very reason.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But so then, of course, again, sometimes we pay money to advertise these illustrations, promote them in the Christian community. So we spent some money yesterday to do that, and of course, and you get people just screaming, "This is a Christian country, and this is the tradition, and if you don't like the pledge, you get the hell out." And so the illustration, the commentary, is really all about, it was never in the pledge to begin with. We're not talking about taking under God out of the pledge. We're talking about taking it back out of the pledge. 1954, born-again Christian, Eisenhower throws it in during the McCarthy era of list making, again, which is why we use the keeping lists of the evildoers, Bible verses as part of that illustration. So again, there's fun stuff. There's Old Testament, there's New Testament, there's commentary of modern culture and how the Bible plays into that as well. We kind of try and cover all bases.
Yeah, you're following the fine tradition of the sequel becoming a little darker than the original.
I wouldn't say it. Being cut into 12 pieces. We do deal a bit more with rape and incest. We do deal a bit more with abortion and homosexuality. So yeah, we were definitely not pulling any punches this time around, but it's still whimsical, it's still fun, and it's still cutting the edge of the envelope.
Oh yeah, I should say it is a hoot. I enjoyed it, and my daughter was she's 12, and she saw the incision on Adam in the first page. She's like, "Oh, I'm not ready for this yet."
That's why it's definitely not for kids. I mean, it's kind of fun to look at for kids, but we actually ended up putting a parental advisory. We updated the cover to put a parental advisory on the cover for biblical content, just because only at Christmas time, we got so many angry emails from sweet grandmothers who bought it off Amazon and didn't realize it was a satire and it wasn't meant for children. And, they're reading all about foreskins and dead unicorns and cannibalism. And it's not, the Bible isn't for kids.
Right, the whole thing. Well, and I look forward, hopefully there will be more from the book of Horus, especially any verses about creating world peace.
Let's see, not a lot about world peace in the Bible.
Oh, man. Well, Horus, it's been great to have you on the program, and I look forward to seeing you in Seattle in August. And for those of you at home, this will be your chance to see Volume 2 of the Awkward Moments Children's Bible.
Yeah, we're looking forward to Seattle. We're going to be... they talked me into writing a song, so there'll be a world of a song called Mizeo, which is Greek for hate. So we'll be together. We might start a couple things on fire and tell some jokes and show a lot of new illustrations. Just have a good time together.
It sounds like a blast.
Good, Michael. Hey, appreciate the conversation.
That was fun.
This is the Secular Nation Podcast, signing out.